Cash flow plans do not work because you leave things out. That's why we're going to go through a whole budgeting system here because it's a checklist of little things that sometimes will sneak up on you and you forget about. You forget about soccer pictures. You forget that cars break down, car repairs. You forget about these things. And if you go through a little checklist, you'll go, oh, that. And then when you start adding it up, you get a more realistic picture. When your budget is not realistic, when it's just a wet finger in the air, then that's when you have crashes in your budget and you're going to end up with a lot more emergency budget committee meetings. Cash flow plans don't work if you overcomplicate your plan. If the nerd goes into steroid overdrive and the budget is 66 pages long and it takes a master's degree in business, an MBA to understand your budget, no one's going to live on that in our busy culture, our go-go culture. You're not going to do that. You have to keep your life simple enough in this busy world with the budgeting so that you actually do it. That's the trick. Because that's the other reason they don't work, is people don't do a budget. You see, a budget won't work if you don't do a budget. This is not hard. And we need to do a different budget every month. We're going to start and spend this coming month's money on paper before the month begins. Every month, do a different set of forms. Forever. Now, eventually you'll get to where the kinks are worked out and it'll be pretty smooth, and most of that is repetition. But for the first few months of doing this, for the practice and to build the muscle in your character, do the details. Do lots and lots and lots of little details for those 3 months in particular while you're in Financial Peace University. So do the budget. And then a budget won't really work if you don't actually live on it. So you can do it and it's all theory and you didn't get anywhere. You actually have to live on the budget. On paper, on purpose, you write it all out, you got a game plan with your spouse, you pinky swear and spit shake, the nerd and the free spirit are together, we're walking forward, and then you just go do something that had nothing to do with what was written down. You actually have to do what you wrote down. You can't spend any money ever again except what you wrote down. And if you don't like what you wrote down, you know whose fault that is? Yours. So change it. If you want to change it, it's yours. Change it. But change it if you're married with your spouse. Because if you go home and go, honey, look what I did. That's not the rules. Okay? We're going to do this together. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove much of the management by crisis from your finances. If you're going through this class right now and you are struggling with money, things are really tight. Maybe you're even behind on some bills and you just really don't know what to do. What you've got to do first is you have to establish what we call your 4 walls around your house. You have to put up the 4 walls of your home. Take care of your own household first. Before you do anything, do food. Then do shelter. And then do utilities. And then do clothing and transportation. Food, shelter, clothing, transportation, utilities. Before you do anything. About 20-25% of the people that come into our offices for counseling or meet with one of our counselors across the nation that we've trained, about 1/4 of them come in and they're current on MasterCard or the student loan and behind on their house. Is that backwards? Say yes. Yes. If you're going to be behind on something, let MasterCard squeal like a pig. All right? But be current on the house. Never get behind on your house while you pay some other goober somewhere. Never let your lights get cut off while you pay some other goober somewhere. You've got to keep this stuff in perspective and set priorities when you're in crisis. Now, what Sharon and I did and what we teach people to do is, if you're in crisis, of course, you have to assess the situation. What are we going to do to earn some more income? What are we going to sell so that we can get this thing to balance? But in the meantime, we're doing a budget and we're going to spend that money on paper until the money runs out, and we draw a line where the money runs out. When the money runs out, everybody below that line that month doesn't get paid. There's not enough money. I wanted to pay them, but I didn't have the money to pay them. And I'm going to decide on purpose, on paper, before all the yelling starts, who I'm going to pay. Now, I don't like that. I want to pay them all. But I'm going to draw that line there. And we had one guy call up as a credit card collector, and he's screaming at me on the phone, calling my mother names and all this stuff, and he's going on with all this stuff and all these threats, and we're going to take your firstborn, and and all these things. They come up with some bizarre stuff, don't they? And I said, well, listen, man, I'd really like to pay you, but you're below the line. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, every month we do our bills, we lay everything out, and we draw a line where the money runs out. And we pay everybody above the line, and those that are below the line, we want to pay them, but we can't pay them this month, and this month you're below the line. And he said, You're kidding. I said, do I sound like I'm kidding? A little pause there. So how do I get above the line? You're nicer next time you call, you twit. Right? Gee. But you're beginning to get the idea how this deal works, right? Manage money. When you make your money behave, it stretches, it goes further. Because managed money has more muscle. It works harder. When you manage your time, you get more out of your day. It's the exact same situation. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove many of the money fights from your marriage. It'll actually cause a money fight in your marriage if you're not careful the first time you sit down. I've warned you of that already, right? So be careful, nerds and free spirits. Do this gently. It's painful, this thing called change, okay? But long term, if you get together on where you spend your money, when you agree on your spending, you've agreed on your dreams, you've agreed on your fears, you've agreed on your goals, you've agreed on your priorities, you've agreed, you've created unity in your marriage. It's powerful stuff. It'll remove much of the guilt, shame, and fear that could be associated with buying something like food. I remember distinctly when we were broke, standing at the grocery store, writing a check, wondering if as I wrote that check, I was afraid I had just spent the money to pay the light bill with, because we didn't have a plan. We were out of control. I didn't have it in my head, and I remember kind of sweating. You ever had that feeling where you kind of get a little bit of sweat on your upper lip, a little bit in your hand, when there's a little fear? Did anybody ever do that but me? Say yes? Yes. Yeah. And I remember writing that check and going, man, I had this feeling in me and I was really glad when I got home and we added it all up and I had the money to actually pay the electric bill and keep it on. You'll never have that feeling again when you have a written plan, because you got the light money and then you got the money for groceries and everything is laid out there in order and you know exactly what's going on. It gives you this sense of power, this sense of destiny with your money. It will remove many of the overdrafts from your life, the bounced checks, the bounced debit card transactions. And that stuff, as we've already discovered, is very expensive. And it will also, of course, in the process of doing that, remove a lot of stress. A written plan, if actually lived on and agreed on, will remove overspending on a certain area. Just like the guy I talked about, he's overspending on restaurants, and so he didn't have the money, quote unquote, for retirement because of mismanagement. Not because he didn't make enough, but because he didn't have a plan. He didn't have it laid out. He hadn't given every dollar on paper, on purpose, a name. And if you don't tell your money what to do, as John Maxwell said, you will always wonder where it went.
You need to have a budget to be wealthy, because there's no way you're going to be wealthy without, having a spending plan and using your money wisely.
Now, the zero-based plan is where every dollar has a name before the month begins. Income minus outgo equals exactly zero. So you have to figure out what you're going to make and then spend that on paper. And we're going to do that with a form system here in a few minutes. But that's the basic idea. Every dollar has a name on paper, on purpose, before the month begins, and in agreement with your spouse if you're married. If you're single, you have somebody else look over it to make sure you know where you're going and what's going on. Also, about the time we went broke and started doing budgets, we started doing this thing called the envelope system. It has been around forever. And all the envelope system is this. We figured out that on some things, we get automatically drafted out of our checking account. For mutual funds or for insurance, they automatically draft us. For our utilities, they automatically draft us. We just want all of that on autopilot. That's fine. Other things, we write a check and mail the check through the mail, right? But other things, when we would go into the grocery store, or we would go out to eat, or we would go shopping for clothing, we would have a set amount and we never knew where we stood with it. We would always be a little over or not over, and we wouldn't be in balance, and we'd come home kind of with that feeling again that maybe I just spent the money that should have been used for something else. And we discovered how to fix that. And we actually kind of discovered it while we were having a big fight about the grocery store. Because Sharon's like, you don't give me enough for groceries. And I'm like, you spend too much at groceries. And you know how that works, right? And it really wasn't a pleasant conversation where we came to a mutual agreement. It was more like a knockdown drag out. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I read about this thing with Larry Burkett. We're going to try this. How much do you need for groceries in a month? And she said, well, I could do it on $600, but if you give it to me every time and not gripe at me, I could do it on $500. And I said, well, all right, we can do that. This was a long time ago when $500 was a lot of money. And so we got an envelope out. We wrote food on the envelope. And at the first of every month, or on the 1st and the 15th, if you get paid that way, we would put $500 or $250 in cash in the envelope. And then you don't buy anything out of the food envelope except food. And you don't buy any food ever except out of the food envelope. And so if you go out to eat and you forget the food envelope, you have to turn around and go back home and get the food envelope. No cheating. We did that one time. I can show you the location where we turned around in the parking lot of this place to go back home, and it surprised the babysitter, kind of scared her, and went back in and got the food envelope, and then we went out to eat. When we did that, when we went, no, we can't go write a check, or we can't hit the anytime teller, we've got to stick with our system. When we made the effort to turn around, drive back to the house 3 or 4 miles there, and surprise the babysitter, something clicked inside of us and our life started changing. Because there was a moment there where we drew a line in the sand and we said, we're not going to misbehave anymore. That's a big deal. And so we said, we're going to have the food envelope. We're buying all of our food out of the food envelope. Clothing envelope. How many of you buy clothing and then somebody at your house gripes at you about that? Hello, no, be careful. Okay. What if you had an amount in the clothing envelope that you had agreed to and it can't be spent on anything except clothes? Then you'd never get griped at if you bought clothes with that money, right? Because that's all it can be spent on. As long as you don't go over that amount, then there's no griping, because we all agreed on this amount in our budget. That's how it ended up in the envelope. To this day, if you talk to Sharon Ramsey and you get her to open her purse, you'll find our deluxe envelope system in her purse right now. We still do envelopes every single month. We don't do many of them. We only do 3 or 4 things with envelopes. But we still write out a check that includes the food, it includes the entertainment, it includes the clothing, and we cash those checks and we put that amount of cash in each of those envelopes with those labels on them, and it keeps us from overspending that category. Because if you look in the food envelope and there's no money in the food envelope, you don't order a pizza. You warm up leftovers. Shocking. Well, really, new tires or a car breaking down aren't unexpected things. These are things you can count on. Tires wear out and cars break. So you always need to have 2 things going. 1, you need to have an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of expenses. And 2, in your budget, be budgeting for car repairs. To not do so is pretty naive because cars break. You can count on it.
If you don't already have your own checking account, now is the time to get one. It's a great way to learn how to be in control of your money and keep track of what's coming in and what's going out. To get started, shop around. Some banks charge fees for checking accounts, so you'll have to do a little research to get the best deal possible. Look online or visit local banks to find a free student account. It's also important to understand how to use your debit card and what fees you might pay for using it. For now, know this. You can use your debit card in a store to pay for things like food or clothes, or online for things like movie tickets or music. Banks usually don't charge fees for those transactions. You can also use your debit card at an ATM to withdraw cash. That's where fees come in. Ask your bank what ATMs you can use for free and which ones will cost you money. And please don't buy overdraft protection. Overdraft protection lets you borrow money from the bank if you spend more money than you've got in your account. Of course, they'll charge you fees for the service and interest on the amount you borrow. That's basically just like another form of going into debt. What the bank doesn't know is you're on a budget. So you don't need to pay anyone to babysit your bank account because you won't be overdrafting. When you open up a checking account, go ahead and open up a savings account too. The checking account is where you'll spend your money, and the savings account is, you guessed it, where you save. Guys, it's much easier to actually save your money for big stuff if you put it into a savings account. With your budget in place and a plan for how much money you'd like to save out of each paycheck, you can even set up an automatic transfer to your savings account. By the time you see your paycheck, the savings are already taken out. You probably won't even notice the difference. It's a beautiful thing, really. Trust me, it's so much fun to watch your savings account grow automatically.
Whenever I talk to high school students about budgeting, I always get the same response. Budget, but I don't have any money. And I always say the same thing. Yes, you do. You've got some money. You just need to think a little differently. If you have a part-time job after school, or even if your parents give you an allowance, or like we teach a commission for doing work around the house, you've got some money. But it even goes further than that. Do your parents buy your clothes? Do you ever go to the movies or go out to dinner with friends and your parents pay for it? Do you have to pay for cheerleading or sports or band fees? Do you put gas in your car? All of those things represent dollars that are flowing right through your fingers, even if your parents are giving you the money for all of it. So don't tell me you don't have any money. Chances are you're spending a lot of money every month already. And all we want to do is just plan how you're going to spend that money before you actually spend it. That's all a budget is. It's a spending plan for your money. You are telling your money what to do and where to go. The first thing I want you to do is to talk to your parents about all the things they pay for every month for you. And instead of having them just pay for all the stuff individually one at a time, ask them if they'll figure out how much money they'd end up giving you for the entire month anyway. And just deposit that one lump sum in your bank account. From there, it'll be up to you to budget that money and to make sure that you're paying the fees, getting the school clothes, buying the movie tickets, all that kind of stuff. Now, your parents aren't going to do this if you don't have a budget. And that means you're going to have a budget. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to prove to them that this is going to work. If your folks go along with it, especially if you already have an income from work, then you have a pile of money to manage every month in this scenario. If you get the hang of this while you're still in high school, you'll be a pro by the time you're out of school and working for real. Now, I know that your expenses today aren't the same kinds of expenses you'll have later in life, so we developed a student budget form. So, no more excuses. Starting this month, you have to do a written budget every month for the rest of your life. That's what people who win with money do. Take a look at the form. The first thing you'll do is write down how much money you have coming in on the income blank. And that includes all your income, whether it's from your parents, a part-time job, cutting grass, babysitting, even birthday money. Then go down the list and write down every single thing you know you have to spend money on for this month. We're talking everything here. From your clothes to your club dues to your cell phone bill. If you think you're going to want to see a movie or go to a concert sometime this month, then write it down. The whole point here is to spend every dollar on paper, on purpose, before the month begins. Every dollar has a mission. Every dollar has a name. The goal of the budget form is to have your income minus your expenses equal exactly zero. That's what we call a zero-based budget. And that means every dollar of your income is accounted for and has a job to do. If you subtract your expenses from your income and then you have money left over, then go back and spend or allocate that money somewhere on the paper. You could put it in savings, you can give it, or you can just eat an extra pizza that month. I don't care what you do with it as long as you do it on paper, on purpose. I want you to plan what you're going to do with your money. If your expenses are more than your income, then you got a problem. That means you busted the budget. And since we don't borrow money or use credit cards, it means you have to go back and adjust something to get that final number to zero. You're going to have to cut spending somewhere in the budget. You may not be able to go to that concert. You may not be able to buy those jeans this month. Or you may have to choose between one or the other. Hey, that's life. That's the real world decisions and issues you face every single month of your adult life going forward. This form isn't rocket science. It's basic math, folks. But once you get the hang of it, this little form will set you up to win big time. From now on, do a budget every month. Well, it's always a good idea to just have a plan, anything you're doing. Those that begin with the end in mind are those that complete the task. Stephen Covey says in the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, begin with the end in mind. And so if you've got an end in mind with your exercise regime, with your spiritual walk, with your academics, hey, you need to make sure you get all the classes so you get the degree. That's a plan. And so having a plan usually is going to cause you to be able to hit your goals versus just kind of wandering around. And so budgeting actually applies to almost every area of your life.